Greetings. This is the historic overview of the Australian boxer Colin Bell. Colin Bell stood 5'11", 195 pounds, and he was one of the students of the Australian teacher Larry Foley. Larry Foley cast Colin Bell aside relatively early in his career, around 1911, because he did not believe that he had what it take to be a championship quality contender. So Colin Bell needs to be, I would assume, be towards one of the later people that Larry Foley actually taught, as he died in 1917, and 1911 here is when he is casting Colin Bell aside. Now, Colin Bell had a lot of difficulties in the early part of his career, kind of getting started, as he was a boxer who did not really contain any type of killer instinct, and he was very cautious. It said one of the quotes was he was rather reserved and cautious fighter who learned to become a good fighter. But Colin Bell was chiseled much like what they would describe as the Hercules frame. He was big, thick, barrel-chested, a true cruiserweight at about 195 pounds in his prime. He often weighed more than that, but he was one of the true people with the size to be a legitimate heavyweight, even though he was 5'11". He's from the 1883 class, as he was born at the very same year as Sam Langford. And we'll have some fun with Colin Bell's boxing profile as he systematically goes through all of the great fighters there, the black fighters, as he fights McVeigh, Sam Langford, and Joe Jeanette. All three of them he faced. Of course, he's not facing Jack Johnson because he's just so inactive. He's not really taking on a lot of people. So I have two quick things I'd like to read from different sources about Colin Bell that are nice little intros to the Australian fighter. And we're going to start with a little passage out of Sam Langford's book by Clay Moyle. Sam Langford, The Greatest Uncrowned Champion, by Clay Moyle. And we're going to read the part in here when they introduce the big Australian heavyweight. So on June 19th, Sam faced off with the big Australian heavyweight Colin Bell. Colin Bell, known as the Moree Mountain, was an impressive 29-year-old physical specimen with an enormous chest and set of shoulders. He was considered one of Australia's greatest athletes at the time and once won the Professional Jumping Championship of Australia. Some of his performances include a standing high jump of 5'7", a standing broad jump of 12 feet 4 inches, and a standing back jump of 10 feet 1 inch. He was also considered an accomplished sprinter. He stood 5'11" and weighed approximately 190 pounds, and had only taken up fighting 2 years earlier. Bell had learned to box under the tutelage of Larry Foley, a renowned Australian fighter who retired undefeated at the age of 32 in 1879, and eventually opened up a very successful gym known as the White Horse. Foley had tutored such giants of the ring as Peter Jackson, Young Griffo, Bob Fitzsimmons, and Frank Slavin, Joe Goddard, and Harry Lang, to name a few. So although Bell got a late start in the game, he couldn't have picked a finer trainer. Sam and Colin Bell fought a 15-round draw on a sweltering summer day in Rockhampton, Australia, an event promoted by George Lawrence. The bout turned out to be poorly attended, and the blame for this was the ticket prices were set too high. Neither party was pleased with a draw, and a story that was often been repeated is that Sam Langford, knowing Bell's reputation as an accomplished sprinter, immediately challenged Colin to a 75-yard foot race, with the understanding that the winner would then be awarded the decision. Sam reportedly jumped out to an early lead, but Colin caught him at the wire with the foot race. Like their bout, it ended without a clear winner. The two men would go on to meet again over a little over a year later in Boston to determine who was the better man. And they mentioned that bout during Colin Bell's obituary that, he held the great Sam Langford to a 15-round draw on a sweltering summer day. So that was one of his large accomplishments in the ring is getting the draw with Sam Langford. Okay, now I'm going to read what is from a blog about Australian fighters, the Sydney Stadium blog spot, and I'm going to read a little passage on this. Bell had an indifferent career as a boxer. He placed some good wins to his credit, but other fights he should have won were snatched away from him in his hour of victory by men who had acknowledged defeat inside the ring, fighting on in the hopes that the tide may turn in their favor, would have gone under to him. That was Bell all over. There was a sort of faint-heartedness or soft-heartedness about him that caused him to hesitate when he should have gone in to finish his man. A shortage of combativeness more in keeping with the kindergarten than the boxing ring. Still, Bell could not help it. He was a sort of boxing misfit, a skilled Hercules who became one of the great Bailing, was a boxing pygmy. He did his best to overcome his weakness, but nature remained paramount, and he never did the great things that his wonderful strength and skill should have been an easy accomplishment. Take the fight that he had with Dave Smith at the Sydney Stadium on June 10th, 1916, as an instance. It was typical of other battles with which the Marine giant participated in, with, if any, this difference that he demonstrated his incapacity to become a great fighter in a great measure more than usual. For that night he had victory within his grasp 4 or 5 times, and was not equal to effectively killing what should have been easy for him. Bell had just returned from a trip to England and America, where he had a fight with Bombard Billy Wills and Joe Jeanette. Without adding to his laurels, he looked a veritable giant alongside Smith, who, although a heavyweight champion of Australia, was little better than a middleweight. But this tremendous advantage did not worry Smith, who had the fighting instinct well developed, and besides was a firm believer in the familiar popular boxing saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And so, instead of Bell being the aggressor and endeavoring to overwhelm his man with his strength, it was Smith who took up the attack from the moment they were called together. David and Goliath in a modern setting. The enormous strength which Bel possessed, with the added advantages of skill with his hands and cleverness on his feet, should have counseled the big fella to carry war into the enemy camp. But the absence of the devil in him prompted caution, proving his undoing. Smith, realizing that his strength would not prove equal to this task if he remained on the defensive and allowed Bel to wear himself down, punished his man at every opportunity and set a pace that might have caused his own undoing had he not been in superb condition. The fact was that Smith knew of Bel's weakness and, like a good general, capitalized on it at every stage of the contest. Ducking and sidestepping and dodging, he leaped in and out of the mountain of muscle in front of him, and so punished him about the head with lefts and rights that after a few rounds Bel was tottering, but only monumentally. He pulled himself together well, then did what he should have done from the start, opened out. For a round or two he fought as if he really meant it. Smith was hard to put out and defend himself in the sixth session was in such a bad way that Bel had taken proper advantage of the opportunity. He would have surely won with a knockout. But he did not. He procrastinated. He just could not assert that once devil in him that constituted the difference in victory and defeat, with the result that Smith was given the breather that enabled him to gather his scattered senses. And having done that and possessing the very thing that Bel was deficient in, he made attack his defense, and in a few moments was dominating the fight again. With all this, it must not be imagined that Bel was fighting badly. Far from it. Neglecting to follow up his advantage and consequently being forced to play a minor role when he should have been winning on his path to victory. Again, a few rounds later, he caught Smith with a terrific left over the right eye, splitting it badly and causing blood to flow freely. A second later, he hooked a powerful left to the jaw, and again Smith was flying distress signals. But did Colin Bell go in to finish his man? No, he did not. And so Smith, maintaining a relentless attack, continued on until the time of the 10th was reached, when Bell was obviously spent. For a while the big fella tried to bluff that all was well, but Smith refused to believe that and continued to pepper him with lefts and rights. And then, out of nowhere, Bell got another chance. The heavy right on the jaw had Smith in such a bad way, but instead of crowding in and administering the finishing punch, as he had plenty of opportunities to do so, he allowed the damaged warrior freedom from trouble until such time his head had cleared, and then he had taken what was coming to him, which was not altogether pleasant. By the time the 14th round was reached, Bell was badly used up. Smith had gradually worn him down until he was comparatively easy for the smaller man to handle. And so Smith, who was showing signs of wear and tear himself, concluded that the best thing to do would be to get the business over with. With right and left, he plastered Bell unmercifully and drove him staggering back to the ropes. As Bell rebounded, Smith's right flashed through the air to the opposing jaw, and Bell crashed to the floor, helpless. The finishing punch was not a particularly hard one, but it was all that was necessary to terminate the big fella's interest in the proceedings. If ever a boxer should have won a fight, it was Bell that night. But altogether, nature had endowed him handsomely with a beautiful physique, and the most essential ingredient and development of a successful fighter had been overlooked: his ability to conjure up the devil inside and finish off a very distressed boxer. So that pretty much sums up many of Colin Bell's deficiencies there, as often he was letting victory slip through his grasp with his rather lackluster ability to finish off fighters in time of distress. And he's actually got a little quote on here where he talks about that. One of the strangest things about Colin Bell throughout his career was that he showed mercy on his opponents. It used to be said that if he had the killer instinct, he would have beaten all the heavyweights of his time. Bell confirms this. When I could knock an opponent out with one punch, that was all right, but after staggering a man, I just could not go in for the kill. I just couldn't do it. That's all there was to it. And this, indeed, was Colin Bell's shortcoming. Even though he was a beautiful, chiseled heavyweight in the olden terms of a 195-pound heavyweight, what Bell lacked was a killer instinct, and he kind of very much fought like the boxer Arthur Pelkey. After Pelkey killed the great White Hope Luther McCarthy in the ring, he very much developed a Colin Bell syndrome, where he just had no killer instinct anymore, as he had PTS and very much never had the ability to close out boxers in trouble. This is a common trait that happens with many boxers. Even Ezzard Charles himself, one of the great all-time boxers, suffered from this very trait that Colin Bell is having trouble with. But nonetheless, Colin Bell is still big enough, strong enough that he places on number 48 on this list. And he has more ability, I guess, than some of the welterweights and some of the lower level middleweights, as just his pure size is enough to catapult him to a higher stage than some of the previous fighters. And obviously, at his very best, he had the skill to be able to do a 15-round draw with a very much in his prime Sam Langford, as they were born at the same time, and they were both the same age when they fought. And so Colin Bell's ceiling was high, even though he is one of the lowest scorers of all the pioneer fighters here. As the article states, he was a little bit of a boxing misfit, and that's some of the qualities and some of the detriments of the fighter known as Colin Bell, the Australian giant. And his boxing profile is coming up as we explore the ring career of Colin Bell. Thank you.